Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Talib Noor Mohammed. My name is Talib Noor Mohammed. I am the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Granville. And before we begin, it is my great honor to invite to the podium Syexwáliya Ann Whonnock and Chief Wayne Sparrow from Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam to help us start off in a good way.
Go ahead, you go first with the prayer and I'll...
On health and spalwin, quiscleke, quachnomi, tenoyapan and sequedo, to squals to seats, Syexwáliya quashaman sna, and Whonnock quian sna, chen. I welcome each and every one of you today to this beautiful day and important announcement that's taking place. I'm Syexwáliya, also known as Ann Whonnock from the Squamish Nation. I'm a councillor and one of the spokespersons, and I welcome you to our shared territories of Musqueam, and to Tsleil-Waututh. So I raise my hands to all of you. Today we're gathered for a very important topic about the climate change and action plans, and being involved as Indigenous people and the knowledge that we can contribute in regards to going not to Queequeg in the long ago. Everything we know about the land, water, and air is now happening to be able to contribute to action plans and our Indigenous knowledge. So it's an honor to be here today, and I just want you to all open your hands. Don't block the energy, the force. And we'll say, Chenkwe mentomi kakakanak chesiam, yonso tenoyap and manman squalwin to squals to seats. Asking you, Creator, to watch over and guide all your children today and help them with their squalwin feelings in their hearts and minds, their emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health and wellness. And asking you, Creator, also to let today be a yetwan halt dates up, an excellent work, and see us all safely home at the end of the day. Tama kwitsi snatchum.
Siam, Siaya, Ichwail, Siam. My name is Wayne Sparrow. I'm the elected chief of Musqueam First Nation. My traditional name is Yakalak. I just want to thank our auntie, our elder, for opening us up in a good way. It's very important that we make our presence today, and I want to acknowledge the ministers and the city for acknowledging and following protocol. I'm here with our staff, Igani, that, you know, when Musqueam, as First Nations people, the environment and the climate and the habitat has always been very important to First Nations people. In Musqueam, we're a fishing community, always have been, always will be, and hopefully, Mr. Wilkinson, when you were fisheries minister, made some drastic changes to help protect some of our salmon. Once again, I want to acknowledge all your work there, you know, for the government to come out and make those hard decisions. But the decisions are for the future, and it's not just for today. So once again, I want to acknowledge you. I also want to acknowledge Igane, who's now, as we've been growing in our community to look after all of these important issues, we've now opened up our environment stewardship department, and being briefed by Igane that Musqueam wants to be ahead of the municipalities and the federal on net zero and the climate change. So once again, it's a privilege and honor to be here, and I want to acknowledge all the hard work that the government's doing. I always say as First Nations people that we're here for our next generation to make sure the benefits that we have here are going to be left for our children, for not just the First Nations people, but the people in the country and the province and the city. So once again, Haichka, and I want to acknowledge Igani for all of her hard work that she does and the leadership that she does on behalf of our community so that we can accomplish those goals. Good to see everybody here, and I do have to leave almost right away. Speaking of fishing, I gotta go out on my boat. But I hope everybody has a great summer, and thanks for all the hard work that you do in acknowledgement. Haichka Siam, thank you.
Chen Quinman told me I'm grateful and thankful to each and every one of you, and glad to have the ministers acknowledge us and allow us to start the proceedings today in a good way. Tama kwetsi snachim. Those are my words.
Well, Thank you so much for starting us off in a good way. Syexwáliya from Squamish, and from Chief Wayne Sparrow from Musqueam, and Chief Thomas from Tsleil-Waututh may be joining us later, but she was unable to join us at the beginning of the program. And we're here today to talk about the reality of climate change and how we can respond together. And as we've just heard from our elders, there is a lot for us to learn in terms of how we think about working in collaboration and harmony with nature, and how we respond to the challenges that we have, not just with new technology, but also learning from what Indigenous communities have taught us in the past. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us as we think about the challenges that we have faced over the last number of years, not just here in British Columbia, but across this country. And I reflect on our learnings that Minister Blair and I had when we were on the Sumas Prairie. And if only past generations had listened. So I think there's a lot for all of us to learn. And we know that climate change affects everyone, whether it's rising sea levels, smoke from forest fires, extreme heat, disrupted supply chain, the impact on health. These are just few of the impacts that we all feel and that we're feeling across this country and here in my riding of Vancouver Granville. So that's why this announcement today is so important for all of us. It's important for us to recognize that having a whole of society approach to help us plan for and adapt to the worst impacts of climate change, and to respond in a way that allows future generations to have the clean air and water and land that they deserve. And so I'm really excited and very, very grateful that we are all gathered together today in your presence and with your good wishes to begin us in this way. And this announcement really is about the recognition that all of us at all levels of government and within the federal government need to be working together, we need to be working hand in hand, and we need to approach this complex issue in a way that recognizes its urgency, that recognizes its opportunity in terms of how we respond, what it means for the future of our economy, for the future of our health, for the future of our planet, indeed for the future of our children and grandchildren. So it is my great pleasure and privilege to invite to the podium now my dear friend, the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, the Honorable Steven Guilbeault.
Thank you so much, Talib. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Syexwáliya Nations. Thank you for the opening prayer and the opening remarks to get us started in a good way. J'aimerais également remercier mes collègues, le ministre des Ressources naturelles, l'honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, et le ministre de la Protection civile, l'honorable Bill Blair, qui ont été des alliés de tous les instants dans le développement de cette stratégie. J'aimerais également saluer le maire adjoint de Vancouver, Mike Klassen, le ministre de l'Environnement et de la stratégie contre les changements climatiques de la Colombie-Britannique, l'honorable George Heyman. And as Talib has just said, Canada's climate is changing. Most of you here have felt the impacts or have friends and family who've been affected by wildfires, floods, extreme heat, drought, and other climate impacts. We see more severe climate impact with each passing year, with each passing season, like this year's rash of spring wildfires in BC, Alberta, Quebec, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and the Northwest Territories. More intense fires earlier in the year and in almost every province and territory at the same time. This extreme weather is unprecedented. While we must reduce our emissions to keep the climate from getting worse, we must also make our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. That's why today we're launching Canada's first ever national adaptation strategy. This strategy is the result of 2 years of engagement with stakeholders and partners across the country, including provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representatives, key experts and stakeholders, and Canadians from across the country. In short, this is a whole of society plan to reduce the risk and prepare communities for climate impacts. La stratégie est bien plus qu'un simple engagement à travailler ensemble. Elle contient des cibles et des objectifs précis, and those objectives aimed at reducing the impacts of climate change, protect the health of well-beings of Canadians, to protect nature and biodiversity, to build more resilient infrastructure, and to favor a strong economy while supporting workers. Comme plusieurs d'entre vous le savent, cette stratégie a été initialement publiée en novembre dernier et les provinces, les territoires et les nations autochtones nationales ont eu le temps de l'examiner, de demander et de proposer des changements. La version définitive de la stratégie renforce l'engagement à faire participer l'ensemble des communautés tout en conservant la vision globale, les principes directeurs et les objectifs qui illustrent bien la force de ce document. Now we move to implementation. How we adapt depends on where we are in the country, so the actions we take will often be at the local and regional levels. While this is the first national adaptation strategy, many communities, governments, businesses, nations have already developed their own adaptation plan to prepare for the risks that a changing climate will bring. I commend your leadership and your foresight. In the coming months, agreements between the federal government and provinces and territories will be explored as one way to implement the strategy. The Indigenous climate leadership process will advance self-determined climate adaptation strategies by First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. And the Green Municipal Fund will continue to support municipalities with the additional funds available to communities starting in 2024. Since 2015, the Government of Canada has made more than $10 billion in adaptation investment and disaster assistance. This includes $2 billion in funding commitments since fall of 2022 to support the National Adaptation Strategy and other adaptation activities such as flood mapping and access to flood insurance. Finally, to the members of the advisory tables for the National Adaptation Strategy, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, Indigenous leaders from across the country, businesses, communities, health association, NGOs, and everyone else, and many of you are here with us today, thank you. Thank you for coming together to create a document that will guide us to a more resilient and safe future. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Minister Guilbeault, for your very thoughtful and prescient words. As everyone knows, Minister Guilbeault has been a long time and very passionate advocate for making sure we think about our planet and the consequences of climate change. And you know, he is joined in this venture in many ways by someone who needs no introduction, but I get to introduce him anyways. Jonathan, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, who is the Minister of Natural Resources, because part of our understanding of how we address the issue of climate change is, of course, how we manage our resources. And Minister Wilkinson brings a profoundly wide range of experiences and skills in that regard, but also in his experiences as somebody who has been Minister of the Environment and knows the environment, the challenges that we face in our natural environment extremely well. So I introduce with great pleasure my friend, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I spend much of my time in my role as Canada's Minister of Natural Resources talking about the economic opportunities that can be enabled through a transition to a low-carbon future. I often say, and I will repeat today, that there is perhaps no country in the world that is better positioned to take advantage of these opportunities than is Canada. The current federal government has been and is working hard to ensure that Canada does, in fact, proactively seize these opportunities and becomes a clean energy and technology supplier of choice to a net zero world. As we address the existential threat that is climate change, I strongly believe that we can and we must be optimistic with respect to our ability to rise to this challenge, to substantially mitigate carbon emissions, and to actually turn it into an economic opportunity. At the same time, we need to address the real and significant costs of climate change that are already baked into our future. These costs are being felt by Canadians, and they will only increase as we move forward. And certainly we are going to need to learn to better adapt to these effects of climate change that, as I say, are already baked in. Les Canadiens ne connaissent que trop bien ces coûts, surtout avec les feux de forêt que nous voyons actuellement à travers le pays. Cette année est historique, mais pas inattendue. Hier, le Canada a franchi un seuil que nous espérions ne jamais atteindre. Les incendies de forêt de cette année ont brûlé 7,7 millions d'hectares ce qui fait officiellement de cette année la pire saison de feux de forêt jamais enregistrée au Canada. And every year, the climate continues to change. Extreme weather events cause immense damage around the world. We certainly have seen it here in Canada over the last number of years, from the Fort McMurray fires to Hurricane Fiona, from droughts and crop losses in the prairies to flooding in Ontario and Quebec. And of course, risks to infrastructure of many types due to the melting of permafrost in the north. It is undeniable that these events are increasing in severity and in frequency because of climate change. Experts predict that by 2025, losses will rise to $25 billion, soaring to between $78 and $101 billion annually by mid-century. That is why the work that Minister Guilbeault has led on Canada's National Adaptation Strategy is so very important. L'année dernière, le gouvernement du Canada a publié le tout premier projet de stratégie nationale d'adaptation, établissant pour la première fois une véritable orientation nationale pour la préparation aux événements liés au changement climatique dans l'ensemble du pays. Nous avons également publié le plan d'action pour l'adaptation du gouvernement fédéral. Aujourd'hui, comme l'a annoncé la ministre Guilbeault, nous publions la stratégie nationale d'adaptation finalisée. I am here today for a couple of reasons. First, as a minister from British Columbia, I am very much aware of the effects that climate change have had on many British Columbians, and those that we continue to see even today with the forest fires. The floods and wildfires that have become a regular occurrence in this province pose a threat to the health and to the safety and to the future of all British Columbians. But I am also here as Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, a department which contributes significantly to the national adaptation effort. The work that we are doing with respect to FireSmart to help to enable communities to protect themselves. The work that we are doing to provide equipment funding for provinces and territories to help them in the work that they are doing each and every day right now to address the forest fire effort. The training of additional firefighters with pilots in Indigenous communities that are already underway. And of course, working very hard to make buildings across Canada more resilient to the impacts of climate change, which is a key part of this effort. We are also working to improve the data we use to predict climate change-induced events. To that end, today, I am pleased to highlight that the Government of Canada is investing $164 million from Budget 2023 through the National Adaptation Strategy to advance the ongoing flood hazard identification mapping program. This investment provides 5 years of additional funding towards projects under the program while working to advance nationwide flood mapping coverage and to share accessible flood hazard information with all Canadians. In the face of the climate crisis, Canada and the rest of the world must take bold steps to reduce carbon emissions. However, increasingly, we must also be focused on adaptation. The impact of climate change is upon us, and we are seeing that very much this year. Together, we must work to make our communities more resilient to these impacts. The National Adaptation Strategy represents an important step forward in doing exactly that. I would certainly want to thank Ministers Guilbeault and Blair for their leadership on this file, and I certainly look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister Wilkinson. You know, it's often said that it requires, good policy making and good leadership requires different walks of life and people who have different experiences to come together. We have, of course, Minister Guilbeault, who has been a thought leader, and am I allowed to call you an activist? An activist in the world of ensuring that we address and deal with climate change in a meaningful way. We have, of course, Minister Wilkinson, who has spent his lifetime as a clean tech CEO, and now my dear friend Minister Blair, who has truly a lifetime of public service under his belt as somebody who has been a first responder, somebody who has been in law enforcement and has now served as a public servant for a very long time. And he's, of course, the minister that is responsible for emergency preparedness, making sure that the challenges that Minister Guilbeault and Minister Wilkinson referred to, that we have a plan to address those on the ground. And he is the person that we see when something goes wrong. He is the first person here to make sure that everybody knows the federal government is there to support all the efforts in ensuring that we build for a better future. So with that, the Honorable Bill Blair.
Thank you very much, Talib, for that very kind invitation. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to begin by thanking the elders for their very important words and for the prayer, which it helps us get to an important announcement, but in a very good way. And as we gather here today, on this beautiful day, a sunny day with clear blue skies, I know that all of our thoughts are with those who are being affected by wildfires here in British Columbia and across Canada. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our gratitude for the firefighters, for the first responders, search and rescue personnel, emergency managers, and all of those members in our communities who are battling these fires and supporting evacuation efforts. As of today, there are currently 492 wildfires burning across Canada, and 258 of those fires are deemed out of control. There have been approximately 7.7 million hectares of forest burned so far this year. And unfortunately, that makes 2023 Canada's worst wildfire season on record. Tens of thousands of Canadians have been forced from their homes since the start of the season due to fires or to poor quality of their air from smoke. And many remain displaced as fire risk remains very high or extreme in many parts of our country. But what we have witnessed so far this year must strengthen our resolve to take action and to enhance community strength so that we can move from disaster risk to resilience. The release of the National Adaptation Strategy today marks an important step in that process. And since we announced the first iteration of the strategy last November, updates and improvements have been informed by input from key partners, including national Indigenous organizations, provinces, territories, and municipalities, many of whom are already leading the way on important adaptation actions. The goals, objectives, and targets outlined in the strategy reflect the shared priorities between all orders of government, and the path sets forward not only long-term goals, but also near and medium-term targets to help every region and every community achieve them. The measures in the strategy, which builds upon our emergency management strategy, are not just about building back stronger and adapting to the way of the world which has already evolved. They are also about preparing for our future. And that means investing in disaster preparedness, protecting nature and restoring biodiversity, and building stronger roads, bridges, sewers, and other critical infrastructure. And that can take the form of mitigation efforts like those the Government of Canada is currently developing, including a low-cost national flood insurance program, strengthening the national public alerting system, and important work to advance national public safety broadband network. Initiatives like these can help us to reduce the impacts of disasters like wildfires, flooding, hurricanes, and extreme heat by maintaining readiness and being better equipped to respond and to facilitate recovery. Canada also has an opportunity to be a global leader when it comes to adaptation. And we've been working very closely with the United Nations Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction and regional partners throughout the globe as we work to identify, prepare for, and adapt to our risks. Later this week, on June 30th, we will mark 2 years since the devastating wildfires that tore through the village of Lytton. And the fire resulted in 2 tragic deaths and burned 90% of the infrastructure of that town here in beautiful British Columbia. The community is building back, and the federal government has provided $77 million in funding to help them with the construction of fire-resistant buildings and supports for homeowners to rebuild fire-resistant standards. Those new building codes, those new standards will help that community as it rebuilds to build back stronger, more resilient, and safer for the residents who will return to that community. And by taking action today, we will strengthen our communities and support their overall health and well-being. And together we can build lasting resilience in the near term and most importantly for generations to come. Thank you very much. Merci. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Minister Blair, for those words and for your ongoing support of all of us here in British Columbia. Before I move on to our next speaker, I also want to acknowledge this is an effort that is supported by all of us in our caucus, and my colleague Parm Baines, the MP for Steveston Richmond, is here with us as well. Welcome, Parm. As I mentioned earlier, this is an effort that requires all levels of government to work together, and we are very grateful to have an excellent partner in the government of British Columbia. And it's my pleasure now to introduce and invite my neighbor and our very good friend, the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy of British Columbia, the Honourable George Heyman.
Merci beaucoup, Taleb. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Ministers Wilkinson, Guilbeault, and Blair. And thank you, Syexwáliya, and Chief Sparrow had to leave us, but thank you for welcoming us to the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. As you've heard, as we all know, climate change is posing significant and severe risks to people's health, to our environment, to our economy, and British Columbia has been very significantly impacted by climate change disasters already and continues to be. Unprecedented wildfire seasons, flooding from atmospheric rivers, heat domes, and the impacts are escalating, and unfortunately, we can expect them to continue to escalate. And people, our citizens, are counting on us to keep them and their families safe. After the events of 2021, we sat at a disaster recovery table co-chaired by Minister Blair. I was there along with some of my colleagues. Minister Guilbeault was there. Indigenous leaders were there. And we talked about what we could do to help British Columbians recover from the flooding. But at the same time, we talked about the climate preparedness and adaptation strategy that British Columbia was working on, and the climate adaptation strategy that Canada was working on. And we also talked about how critically important it was that it be done in collaboration with Indigenous peoples, relying on Indigenous peoples' knowledge and experience. We know it's absolutely critical that we take strong action now to reduce future impacts. That's why British Columbia created a standalone ministry dedicated to emergency preparedness and climate response. Canada's new National Adaptation Strategy is a great step. It's a concrete plan with goals, with objectives, and with targets, and we look forward to working with you and with First Nations to make this a reality for communities around our province. And in doing so, we need to learn from past emergencies, we need to build our capacity to be more resilient, and we need, of course, to mitigate the risks of future emergencies. Our new Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, led by my colleague, Minister Bowen Ma, isn't just about responding to and recovering from emergencies. We're also taking active measures to prepare for and reduce the risks of disasters. We need to understand how climate change is driving those risks and where the most severe risks exist, so we can prioritize our preparedness to meet those risks. Since 2017, British Columbia has funded more than 1,600 disaster risk reduction projects, totaling more than $190 million in provincial funds. We've invested $369 million in the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. This fund will support Indigenous and local governments in preparing for and mitigating disaster risk. And as Minister Guilbeault and Minister Wilkinson have also mentioned, and we all know, we need to, at the same time, as we're preparing our communities and our citizens to be resilient and ready for the challenges, the risks, the dangers, the threats of climate change, we need to do everything possible to reduce emissions now, so that the future is not worse. In BC, our plan is called Clean BC, our climate action plan to lower emissions and create a healthier, low-carbon economy that is synchronized with climate action. Tackling climate change also means there will be more job opportunities in clean energy, in clean tech, and in electrification. In BC, we expect more than 1 million jobs will become available over the next 10 years. And we know that we want those jobs to be low carbon, and we want those jobs to contribute to protecting our communities against climate change. We recently announced our new energy action framework, which will regulate emission reductions from industry, from the oil and gas sector, to meet our important sectoral targets, without which we cannot meet our legislated targets. We need to ensure that every sector in British Columbia fits within our climate commitments to British Columbian. And the new energy action framework will also fund new opportunities in clean energy like hydrogen, renewable electricity, and the clean technologies needed to accelerate decarbonization. I want to thank the federal government for this important step forward. I want to thank First Nations in BC and Canada for the work that has been done with our governments to address the climate challenge together. It's great and important to be here to share and work together on our shared priorities. We can be leaders in a clean, low carbon future. We can build a stronger, more resilient Canada as well as communities around our nation. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister Heyman. As you say, we can be leaders, and I think we all know that we need to be leaders in this regard. As we said before, this does take all levels of government. I think this is the second time in a year we are here at City Hall in Vancouver making an announcement that is related to the fight against climate change. And it's a testament to the importance, I think, that the City of Vancouver places on this issue, to see councillors from all political stripes here today, most ably represented by someone I've spent a lot of time this weekend with at a variety of different events, the acting mayor for the month of June here in Vancouver, Mike Klassen.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Tilly. We have been seeing a lot of each other lately. I thank you to Ministers Guilbeault, Wilkinson, Blair, and Heyman for all being here today, and thank you to Chief Sparrow and Councillor Syexwáliya for your words. I'd like to acknowledge that we did have quite a bit of City Council here, but they all got chased into the Council chamber because we didn't have quorum. I am here to represent Mayor and Council. So we're very proud to be a part of today's event to celebrate the National Adaptation Strategy. And on behalf of Vancouver City Council and City of Vancouver, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to City Hall to today's announcement. Climate change is not a far-off challenge. For many across the country and indeed around the world, it's a daily reality. Unseasonable conditions, extreme weather events, and their impacts have become increasingly common in recent decades. In Vancouver, we experienced the impacts firsthand 2 years ago today, June 27th. This is when the heat dome was ravaging our community. Temperatures in the low to mid 40s that we've never experienced here before, and a lot of us still feeling the trauma from that time. We had sweltering temperatures that resulting from the heat dome that claimed the lives of over 600 British Columbians, and mostly elderly and vulnerable British Columbians, and 117 in the city of Vancouver alone lost their lives. Later that same year, an atmospheric river delivered over 500 millimeters of rain to the Fraser Valley, resulting in extreme flooding that cut off all highway connections to the lower mainland and disrupted our supply chain. And frequent air quality advisories due to wildfire smoke have impacted our access to the outdoors and increased health risks for many, which is why we know this. Investing in climate adaptation today is not only prudent, it's the right thing to do to protect us from climate extremes. It will help preserve health and safety of our communities now, and it will protect future generations. Vancouver has already taken steps to bolster our climate resiliency. We're increasing green infrastructure to capture rainfall and reduce flooding. Our park board is working to increase tree canopy through its urban forest strategy. We're adding cooling and filtration to new buildings and retrofitting our existing buildings by adding more low carbon emitting systems to keep homes comfortable year round. We're establishing cooling centers and civic buildings to protect the health and safety of residents during heat extremes and poor air quality events. We're also partnering with Vancouver Coastal Health, BC Housing, social and not-for-profit housing operators to provide additional supports like cool kits for their residents. These are all vital steps that have improved our city's livability and will ultimately create savings for taxpayers in the future. And while we're proud of our leadership, Vancouver has demonstrated in response to climate change, we cannot go it alone when it comes to making our city more climate resilient. That's why it's wonderful to see all levels of government coming together on the National Adaptation Strategy. These combined investments will spark innovation in technology, industry, and our economy, protect and increase our urban green space,
increase our tree canopy, and minimize the impacts of street, property, and shoreline flooding. Investments and proactive policies will help protect our infrastructure that makes our neighborhoods livable while safeguarding residents, especially those that are most vulnerable. And I'm confident, just as I know Mayor Sim is confident, that this announcement will be an important step towards a better, more climate resilient future. We look forward to working with the Government of Canada, Province of British Columbia, and with Musqueam, Squamish, and Syexwáliya Nations partners to make our region, province, and our country more resilient in the face of the changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Klassen. Well, that brings to the end. The formal portion of today's event. I want to thank everyone very much for attending. We will now have a media availability. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin Powerwares, Caitlin, to take over from here.
Hello. Merci pour cette annonce et merci d'être. Media in person, and then I will pass it on to my colleague who is moderating the Q&A online. So if you have a question, please just approach the mic that are at the back behind the cameras here. Just state your name and your media, and one question, one follow-up.
Oui, bonjour, Dominique Lévesque de Radio-Canada pour le ministre Guilbeault. Oui. Je voudrais savoir, est-ce qu'il y a du nouvel argent d'annoncer aujourd'hui? On essaie de comprendre qu'est-ce qui est nouveau aujourd'hui.
Merci pour la question. Alors, comme je l'ai dit dans mon intervention, le gouvernement fédéral a déjà annoncé 10 milliards de dollars jusqu'à maintenant. Ce qu'on fait ce matin, ce n'est pas nous n'annonçons pas de nouvelles sommes d'argent, mais ce qu'on vous présente, c'est donc la première stratégie nationale sur l'adaptation avec des objectifs, des cibles à atteindre, des cibles qui sont mesurables et qui seront mesurées pour nous assurer, par exemple, qu'on réduit le nombre de personnes qui sont affectées par les feux de forêt ou par les inondations, par les vagues de chaleur, réduire le coût des dommages des catastrophes naturelles sur nos infrastructures, que ce soit nos infrastructures naturelles ou nos infrastructures humaines. Alors, mais bien entendu, et ce que nous allons faire, et nous sommes très conscients du fait que nous allons devoir investir plus pour mettre en œuvre cette stratégie-là. Maintenant que nous savons ce que les différents paliers de gouvernement prennent comme responsabilité, se sont donnés comme objectif, la prochaine étape, ce sera évidemment de nous assurer que le financement est là pour mettre en œuvre cette stratégie.
Was there a follow-up? Or you have a follow-up?
Et quand est-ce qu'on pourrait s'attendre à une autre annonce sur plus de financement?
Vous avez 3 ministres fédéraux avec vous. Hélas, la ministre des Finances n'est pas parmi nous, mais il va y avoir plusieurs opportunités, par exemple l'énoncé économique de l'automne prochain et le prochain budget qui serait des moments appropriés pour des annonces supplémentaires en investissement en adaptation au changement climatique.
Prochaine question. Next question, please.
Hi there, this is Stephen LeBay from Glacier Media. This plan says that it is working to eliminate deaths from extreme heat within the next fewer than 20 years. How?
Through a number of measures that we want to implement with our provincial and municipal, as well as Indigenous partners. I think Deputy Mayor gave a number of examples of things that can be done to help reduce and eventually eliminate heat-related death in our cities. Minister Wilkinson spoke about more climate resilient building, resilient to things like heat waves, obviously. Cooling centers in our cities. There's a number of initiatives that have already been identified that we will work together to deploy in the coming years so that we can achieve that objective.
You know, if I just may add to that, with respect to heat events, we're seeing a number of significant impacts right across the country. Obviously, what occurred here in Vancouver, and the city of Vancouver, as the deputy mayor has already indicated, is taking some very, very strong steps in order to create cooling centers, for example, and to bring in new adaptations in new building and housing, to create more opportunities for people who are particularly vulnerable, our seniors and people with disabilities, to be able to access, cleaner air, cooler air, to help them through these difficult events. But we're also seeing heat events manifest themselves in the form of drought and an increase in risk in wildfire. And so it does require that, in acknowledgement that these events are in fact taking place, we have to change the way in which we build our housing, in which we heat and cool our homes, but also as we prepare for the almost, I won't say inevitability, but the higher risk of wildfire. We have to make sure that in our building codes, in our decisions about where we build and how we build, that we take into account the changing reality. And there are also some additional things that are in the National Adaptation Strategy, strong measures that we are taking in order to help communities to build greater resilience through mitigation and adaptation of the risk of climate change, including heat events.
Just as a follow-up question, so what about the people who can't get to cooling centers, who can't afford AC or a heat pump, or maybe who can't afford to turn it on? Does this plan have anything in there that will immediately help these people?
I wouldn't say immediately, but it's certainly our objective to get there. So there's no, unfortunately, when it comes to climate change, there's no magic wand. There's no solution that is going to either solve mitigation or adaptation issues overnight. What we're presenting today is a collective action plan so that we can get there for Canadians and for us as a country. We will be working, and I think if you read through the document, you will see that there is a very important climate justice element or elements that we've weaved through that plan. We've been very mindful of the issues you talk about as we co-develop that national adaptation strategy with our colleagues. So we're not there yet, but we want, and I think with this plan we can get there.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question. Hi there, Chloe Logan here from the National Observer. A question for Minister Guilbeault. So you talk about kind of all these shifts and changes since the initial draft plan was released. Could you hone in on one that you think is the most notable or important to kind of give us a really fathomable example?
When we started talking about this, many of the experts, and some of them are here with us, and stakeholders said, you need to have targets. We were like, targets for adaptation? Like, we could get targets for mitigation. You want to reduce by X percent, or you want to increase your renewables or your transit, your electrification. But I think what you see now is for all of the 5 sectors, we have specific targets, measurable targets that we want to be able to achieve collectively over the coming years. Some are more short-term, some are more medium-term, and some are a bit more long-term. And I think that is probably one of the most fundamental change that has been included into the National Adaptation Strategy from where we started working on this.
Thanks, no follow-up.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question, please.
Thank you. Minister Guilbeault, my name is Yvette Brand. I'm from CBC National News. I'm curious, we're sitting here on the cusp of one of the worst droughts that we have had in BC. We're being warned it's going to be worse this year. We're on the 2nd year anniversary of the heat dome event where 619 people died. Lytton was incinerated. Can you tell me, how are people better protected right now?
I think many of the speakers spoke about some of the initiatives that have been put in place to help with either help better prepare Canadians when it comes to heat waves or forest fires or flooding. But I think we all recognize that Canada's not ready to face the impacts of climate change. And that strategy is our response to that. How do we ensure that Canadians and that we as a country are better prepared to face the impacts of climate change? Some of the things have started to happen. There's already been some initiatives, some investment, but we know we have a lot of work to do ahead of us to ensure that we are better prepared.
Sir, if you were to speak to a Canadian right now who's a renter, who's a low-income Canadian who cannot find the protections that have been made available, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that we're working with provincial governments, with municipalities to be able to provide those spaces for people who either don't have, if we're talking about heat waves, don't have access to a building that is well designed so that you don't necessarily need AC, or that they don't have AC, and we're working to provide those options. And there are shorter term solutions, centers where there is AC that is provided to people if they can't have it at home. But I think ultimately the goal is to ensure that all of our building stocks will be able to withstand impacts of climate change, such as heat waves.
If I may respond in part as well, preparation is also critically important for all Canadians. Canadians need to know their risks, and they need to know what steps that they can take to protect themselves in the face of such risks. And so if we can make sure that vulnerable populations, and that can be seniors, it can be persons with disability. I also want to acknowledge that people who live in First Nations often face, because of the circumstances in which they live, is close to the land and to the water, often face disproportionate impacts from climate-related events. And so it's very important that people know their risks and that we provide them with the tools that they will need in order to be safe. And so knowing where they can go, for example, to get supports or things that they can do. It's also very important, and we've already mentioned, we are working very closely with our provincial and municipal partners in development of a more robust national public alerting system. And so Environment Canada provides excellent information to Canadians about climate-related risks, but we have to make sure that that alerting system is available, accessible to everyone, including all the languages spoken in this incredibly diverse country. And that's also critically important, because we know that when people have early warning of a potential risk, that we can reduce damage and casualty by as much as 30%. And so we're investing significantly in working with our provincial and territorial partners and with municipalities to make sure the public alerting system works. And there's a number of things that are also embedded within this adaptation strategy. And I'll just reference, for example, the development of a national flood insurance plan not only helps people manage their risk, but it also helps them make better decisions in understanding those risks. And as Minister Wilkinson identified, we're doing some very important work on flood mapping and identifying those areas which are of particular risk. And that information is going to enable Canadians to know their risk and to be better prepared to respond to that. It is, quite frankly, different risks in different parts of the country, so it's important that we work with all of our partners at all orders of government and among First Nations to make sure that that information is available to Canadians. So, because we know in the first response to every emergency, it's the local community, it's the local municipality, it's the local leadership that is the first response, and we have to make sure that we have the supports in place for them as well. And that's a very important part of the work in our national adaptation strategy.
Thank you, Minister.
Bonjour, mon nom est Noémie Mukanda pour Radio-Canada. Ministre Guilbeault, ma question s'adresse à vous. On le voit, il y a beaucoup d'événements climatiques auxquels s'attaquer. Il faut s'adapter à beaucoup de choses en même temps. Comment on priorise dans ce plan d'adaptation pour répondre le mieux possible à limiter les risques de désastre et à aider la population canadienne?
Comme je le disais tout à l'heure, la stratégie nationale se veut très diversifiée parce que dans différentes régions, même à l'échelle de municipalités, les enjeux ne sont pas les mêmes. Dans certains cas, et on l'a vu au cours des 3 derniers mois, il n'y a pas longtemps, on parlait de tempêtes de verglas sur la côte Est. Et après ça, d'inondations sur la côte Est, des inondations ici, et là maintenant, les feux de forêt partout à travers le pays. Alors, il faudra que la stratégie soit capable de répondre aux besoins locaux ou régionaux. Et il n'y a pas de... Vous me demandez est-ce qu'il y a une priorisation? Il n'y en a pas. Il faut déployer des mesures, dans certains cas, pour protéger les gens des feux de forêt. Dans d'autres, les vagues de chaleur. Pour d'autres, ce seront les tempêtes tropicales, comme Fiona qu'on a vu sur la côte Est, ou encore les vagues de chaleur. Et mon collègue, le ministre Blair, parlait de l'importance de la préparation. Je vais vous donner un exemple très concret. Grâce aux projections des scientifiques d'Environnement Canada, on a pu prévoir à quelques centaines de mètres près le parcours de l'ouragan Fiona, ce qui nous a permis d'avertir les populations locales pour que les gens puissent être évacués à temps. Et il n'y a eu Et grâce à ça, on a pu éviter un grand nombre de victimes. Alors, toute la question de la préparation aussi et de la prévision en termes des impacts va jouer un rôle très important dans cette stratégie-là.
Je vais rebondir sur ce que vous dites. Vous parlez justement de la préparation. Hier, je parlais de petit village de Kimberley, qui est ici en Colombie-Britannique, qui est un peu un modèle dans comment on se prépare justement aux désastres liés au climat. Qu'est-ce que, à votre niveau, au fédéral, vous pouvez faire pour aider les municipalités? Parce que le maire de Kimberley disait que c'était important que les municipalités soient proactives, mais c'est un partenariat avec le fédéral. Qu'est-ce que vous faites, vous, à votre niveau, pour justement aider les municipalités? Surtout ici en Colombie-Britannique, on est aussi touché par diverses catastrophes.
Comme je le disais tout à l'heure, nous avons investi au cours des dernières années 10 milliards de dollars en adaptation et en mesures de préparation aux impacts des changements climatiques. Nous avons un partenariat avec la Fédération canadienne des municipalités où nous fournissons des centaines de millions de dollars à la Fédération pour qu'elle, à son tour, supporte des projets d'adaptation au niveau municipal partout à travers le pays. Il y a bien d'autres exemples que je pourrais vous donner, mais c'en est un très concret.
Merci. This concludes the media Q&A unless there's any other questions in person. I will pass it on to Samantha, who is moderating the Q&A online.
Nous prenons maintenant des questions de part des journalistes qui participent sur Zoom. Veuillez utiliser la fonction « Main levée » si vous avez une question. Nous vous demandons de vous en tenir à la question et à une question de suivi. Les combinaisons des touches suivantes peuvent être utilisées sur votre clavier de numérotation. Étoile 6, couper et établir le son. Étoile 9, levez la main. We will now be taking questions from reporters on Zoom. Please use your hand-raising function if you have questions. We'll ask that you keep to one question and one follow-up. Please use the following commands when entering on your phone dial pad. *6, toggle mute, unmute. *9, raise your hand. And the first question will be from David Aiken. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for taking our questions. David Aiken from Global News. And my question actually is first for Minister Heyman, and it's a bit of a twist on the question that my CBC colleague asked. Drought, wildfires, floods, as you review this adaptation strategy, would all those events have improved things? And related, why couldn't BC do its own adaptation strategy? Why is it important to be part of a national adaptation strategy?
We actually have prepared a climate preparedness and adaptation strategy that we released a little over a year ago with a number of elements, but it's also very important to work with our partners in the federal government as well as First Nations, municipalities, and other provinces to ensure that we move forward together. Among some of the measures that we've taken, I've mentioned the creation of the new standalone Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. We've also put in place a year-round wildfire service. So in the fall and winter months, the professionals in the wildfire service are focusing on getting ready for the next year, as well as managing fuels that surround communities at risk, rather than simply have the fire service stood up for 6 months or 7 months a year. We've also taken tremendous measures in terms of debris removal from the flooding, but ensuring as we do that we work with the communities and First Nations to put in place the measures to protect against future flooding. We started several years ago a Healthy Watersheds initiative to restore watersheds to their natural state so they can perform some of their natural functions, among which is diverting floodwaters from into new channels that don't threaten communities. So we have a strategy, we're building on it. We have a risk assessment that we did 3 years ago. We are working to do a new a targeted high-risk assessment to help inform what our priority work should do. And at the same time, we want to work with Canada and our other partners.
Thank you. My second question and my follow-up is actually for Deputy Mayor Klassen. We've heard from lots of experts, I think Minister Blair referred to this, municipalities are on the front line, not only dealing with the effects of climate change, but building use, land use policies, adapting to them. You listed a few of the things Vancouver's doing, but I wondered, as you reviewed this strategy, I wonder to get your opinion about whether council feels that you have the funding, you have the resources, you have the skills training, you have whatever it takes to be able to implement what is in this strategy. Is the toolkit there for your council?
Thank you for the question. I think, as Mr. Guilbeault indicated earlier on, I would say while we're not ready yet to address these major sort of climate events, we are taking very important measures. I have to say that I am, as a new councillor, one of the things that I've been able to learn is just the profound amount of ability that our city staff have, some of the plans that are already in the works. We have building code that is requiring air conditioning systems. We recently passed a council motion to incentivize older mid-rise buildings to look at ways at putting in heat pump systems and other ways of reducing the temperatures that people experience in those buildings. We have an urban forest strategy to try and increase our canopy. A lot of our historical neighborhoods did not have the tree canopy that some of our other neighborhoods have. So we're working on those things together. But as I said from the start, being able to do this together as a local government and working with the federal, provincial, and First Nations partners is the way that we're going to be able to get this done. And so I feel that we have a strong focus on this, and I think that we'll be able to deliver on it because it's the right thing to do.
Notre prochaine question, c'est de Anne, à répondre Anne-Caroline Desplanques. Allez-y.
Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Oui.
Oui, bon, la question est pour Monsieur Guilbeault, s'il vous plaît, si vous m'entendez. Là, sachant que la saison des feux de forêt est plus catastrophique que jamais et qu'il y a eu énormément de dépenses là, depuis 2016, qu'est-ce que tout ce qui a été fait jusqu'à présent a changé et en quoi vos investissements jusqu'à présent ont pu atténuer ce qu'on voit en ce moment où ça n'a pas fonctionné?
Deux choses. D'abord, comme je l'ai dit plus tôt, nous sommes entrés dans l'ère des changements climatiques. Et il n'y a pas de solution magique, il n'y a pas de baguette magique. Nous allons devoir travailler à lutter contre les changements climatiques pendant de nombreuses décennies avant d'être en mesure de limiter, d'une part, les hausses de température et bien sûr les impacts des changements climatiques qui sont associés. Si je fais un parallèle avec un autre enjeu environnemental planétaire très important, celui de la couche d'ozone, vous vous rappellerez peut-être qu'en 1987, il y a eu à Montréal la signature du protocole de Montréal sur la couche d'ozone et on apprenait un peu avant les fêtes que d'ici 2060, les scientifiques estiment que la couche d'ozone devrait avoir presque complètement rétabli des dommages que nous lui avons fait subir pendant de nombreuses décennies. Donc, on parle d'à peu près 80 ans entre la signature de l'accord et un rétablissement à peu près complet. Alors, il va continuer d'y avoir des impacts des changements climatiques. Il n'y a aucun doute. En ce qui a trait à l'adaptation, comme je l'ai dit et plusieurs collègues l'ont répété, nous sommes au début de la mise en œuvre de cette stratégie-là. Le ministère des Ressources naturelles de M. Wilkinson travaille depuis plusieurs années à l'établissement de nouvelles cartes de zones inondables pour nous assurer qu'au cours des prochaines années, on ne permette pas à des gens de construire des immeubles, des résidences, des immeubles commerciaux ou même industriels dans des zones inondables. Ces cartes-là n'avaient pas été mises à jour depuis de très nombreuses décennies. Alors, c'est ce genre de choses-là que nous faisons et que nous mettons en place, mais soyons très clairs, là, il va continuer d'y avoir des impacts des changements climatiques. Ce que nous cherchons à faire, c'est à mieux préparer les Canadiens et les Canadiennes.
Merci.
Avez-vous une question de suivi?
Non, merci.
Okay. We will continue to the next question from Alex Ballingal, Toronto Star.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks so much for taking my questions. Just it seems like a lot of this, obviously there's a lot of targets in here. There's still the bilateral plans that need to be hammered out with the provinces and territories. You know, it sounds like there might need to be more money as well. So I guess that's my first question is, Minister Guilbeault, you talk about $10 billion committed. To fulfill the targets in this strategy, can we assume that more money will be needed, that the federal government and maybe the provinces will have to put more money into this strategy than has already been committed in order to achieve those targets?
The short answer is yes. We know we will need to invest more to better prepare Canadians to face the impacts of climate change.
And just on that sort of how to accomplish those targets question, how can you convince Canadians, you know, we see a lot of targets coming out around the climate strategy, that this is more than just words, that you guys will actually be able to get that money going and actually fulfill these targets, some of which seem ambitious, like eliminating heat wave deaths in 16, 17 years?
If I may begin to answer that, the flood event that took place in November of 2021 here in British Columbia resulted in very significant damage, not just to residents and businesses, but to critical infrastructure right across the province. And the federal government committed through its disaster financial assistance arrangement $5 billion to assist in the province of British Columbia in rebuilding from that event. But one of the things we recognize is just building it back the way it had been previously left us vulnerable to future such events. And we know that more and more of these events are occurring with greater frequency and greater severity right across the country. And so it's one of the reasons we actually formed a committee that was chaired by Mike Farnworth and I, but represented all of the ministries of the provincial and the federal government together. And we looked at the impact of these types of events, particularly a flooding event in British Columbia, on the impact it had on fisheries, on agriculture, on transport, and on infrastructure. It actually touched every ministry in every part of both governments. And so we resolved together to work together to not just make that investment. These are public dollars. We wanted to make sure that we actually invested in future resiliency, in future strength, and in mitigation and adaptation within our communities. And so that's why the work has been so important. As we spend that money to rebuild that infrastructure, those homes and those businesses that were damaged in that particular event, that we do it in a way which is more resilient to future such events. And it's only by collaborating together with all orders of government that we can actually make that happen. And so we are now looking at such things as not just investment in dikes and pumping stations, but new building codes, and even where communities will be built and how they will be built, so that we can create a greater resiliency for the future.
OK, well, on va continuer à la prochaine question de Amelia Makauer, Radio-Canada, Colombie-Britannique. Allons-y.
Merci. Pour ma question, je me demandais si le plan national comprend aussi, ou prend en compte du moins, toutes les questions de nouveaux projets en fait de combustibles fossiles, sachant que par exemple ici en Colombie-Britannique, il y a eu un nouveau projet qui a reçu le sceau environnemental, non seulement de la Colombie-Britannique, mais aussi d'Ottawa, qui est un projet à Kitimat de gaz naturel liquéfié. Donc, est-ce que vous prenez ça en compte, sachant que ça peut sembler contre-productif, ce type de projet?
Peut-être je peux répondre. C'est très important que le Canada et bien sûr les pays partout le monde réduire les gaz à effet de serre dans une manière qui peut assurer que le monde va atteindre le net zéro à 2050. Et bien sûr, ça existe. Il y a les émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans tous les secteurs de l'économie. On doit réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans tous les secteurs. Bien sûr, ça inclut le secteur du pétrole. Et s'il y a les projets qui vont procéder à l'avenir, on doit avoir les émissions qui sont très, très bas.
J'ajouterais peut-être qu'il y a 10 ans ou il y a 5 ans, il n'y a personne qui aurait pu croire ce que je vais dire, mais entre 2019 et 2021, le Canada est le pays qui a le mieux performé de tous les pays du G7 en matière de réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Vous allez me dire, il y avait une pandémie, mais il y avait une pandémie partout dans tous les autres pays. Ça s'appelle une pandémie parce que c'est global. Alors, il n'y a pas juste au Canada où l'activité économique a été ralentie à cause de la pandémie et donc il y a une réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Mais malgré cela, en 2021, nous avons eu la plus forte croissance économique de tous les pays du G7 et nous sommes le pays qui performe le mieux en matière de réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Ce que ça nous dit, c'est que notre plan de lutte au changement climatique, dont Jonathan parlait, commence à fonctionner. Maintenant, il faut continuer de s'y attaquer encore pendant de nombreuses années avant de réussir à réduire de façon significative les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, de façon à prévenir des impacts des changements climatiques trop importants.
Merci, on va fermer là. Thank you, we'll finish there. Caitlin, over to you. À vous, Caitlin.
So this concludes today's press conference. Thank you for joining us today. Merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.